can consciousness be modeled by quantum computing to make humanoid robots be more alive? It's wild.
So what's happening with consciousness is that we have a model of self in the world, and we have a model world in the self. And the intersection of those two things gives us this sort of like conscious identity about how we can actuate the world in order to meet our goals, be it metabolic or survival or otherwise. And
Back to quantum computing, meets consciousness meets humanoid robots. So Gilder was saying, like, she has this hypothesis: robots in the home would be such a cool problem to solve. And I was like, yeah, from a product perspective, obviously, because she was saying when she talks to, users or other people, friends, it's like, well, what if a robot just helped you do all your chores? They're like, hell yeah.
And I think there's a world in which consciousness can emerge where that is like far more advanced than what we are today, and either sees us as pets or just doesn't need us at all. I think the way of AI is evolving, we just live at a unique intersection in time where the potential for this new consciousness is like kind of in our hands.
If there's something it is like to be a thing, then that thing is conscious, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to the ABCs for Building the Future podcast. We have myself, Robert, and Jonathan, my co-founder on Epistemic Me, as your host. On this podcast, we bring on researchers, scientists, entrepreneurs, founders, leaders, builders of the future, people doing big things with big stories to tell. Today is a Build in Public update. I'll give a debrief of our product live with users. And we'll talk about consciousness at the intersection of AI and quantum computing. We'll see how much time we got. We're kind of running on a clock today because we've got something in an hour. So we'll see how much we get through. So this is kind of a special Build in Public check-in after I spent in a few days in Miami at the Don't Die Summit hosted by Brian Johnson and his team. And this was super special because I actually got to demo AI Brian in front of real customers and learn from them. So I had some key insights to share. Our running hypothesis has been, I am a person that wants to grow, self-actualize, improve my health in some way, whether that's improving my sleep, my diet, my exercise. And with AI Brian, I could use that so that I can improve those things and reach my target better self, whatever that might look like for anybody. In between knowing the thing that I got to do, generally speaking, exercise better every day, sleep, diet better. In between knowing it and doing it is a lot of uncertainty. So our hypothesis has been for Epistemic Me that starting with the belief system and accurately modeling the self for a given user, we can then predict what is the next best thing to suggest to them as a habit change that will get them to their target self model, which is a self-actualized, grown, better version of themselves in the health regard. So I got a lot of data points. I actually even recorded a bunch of user interviews, and that was really great to see people go end to end. They did a biomarker test like push-ups, sit and reach, reaction time tests, and then they would get out of that, and I would onboard them into the Don't Die app, and I'd see end to end them entering in their information, and then actually seeing their bio age, and then going to AI Brian and asking AI Brian, how do I improve my bio age? So high level, I got to see that flow and many variants of that flow. So there were some cool things to share. But yeah, before I monopolize the conversation, Jonathan hasn't said a word yet. Jonathan, do you want to give a quick update on what you've been working on for Epistemic Me? And then we'll get back into user research because I think you've been doing some cool stuff. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your vision for personalization metrics, alignment metrics, and maybe our market opportunity to meet a niche out there with chatbot evals with Epistemic Me.
Yeah, cool. I can kind of pick up from that example you were giving at the conference, where you have the BioH test, right? So in the Don't Die app, you can like do push-ups and grip strength and flexibility exercises. And then when you get your score, like the indexes it to your biological age. It'll tell you like what your age equivalency is for doing these things. And so it's kind of fun, right? There is a model of self in there where like, there's scientific data that says there's a age dependent correlation of like the number of push-ups you can do as an adult male. And, like sort of like the less you can do, then the more you correlate with being older version of yourself versus the younger. So this is just like, it's kind of like a statistical metaphysical model of self. So then when you ask somebody and they say upload this data about what they just did, and you want to ask them to get a more informed model of self, like what are the habits that you currently have of why you think that your biological age is 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever it was diagnosed as. Somebody might say like, well, I exercise a lot and I practice my flexibility a lot, so I wasn't too surprised to do these things. Or like you can get the habits that they currently have in their life that they think correlate to these things, and then you can ask them, well, would you like to be like a younger version of yourself? Would you like to be able to do more push-ups? Would you like to be able to stretch further? And then you can survey them about like what their beliefs are about what they can do to change these things. Some of them may be immutable, right? Like grip strength. If you're already doing a lot of stuff like deadlifts and dead hangs and practicing grip strength, maybe you can't increase it a whole lot, but maybe you believe that you can, right? So there's a believability about like the habits I have today, what I can change to the habits I have in the future, and then what my biological age can be. And that's the experience of this, AI coaching experience that we've been evaluating. I think we've been talking about like this feedback loop where you upload the data, the AI coach can ask you questions of subjectivity, gives you an assessment or a plan of recommendations that you can change, and then you choose the plan so that the recommendations. So it's a recommendation engine start, but it also meets like this kind of clinical experience that we've been talking to doctors about, the SOAP loop: subjective, objective, assessment, and plan. And so I think anything to add there, I think that's like the nature. And then I could go ahead and talk about the metrics and evaluations.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So if you want to build an AI coach to be able to do this, to understand your users and then to be able to ask them questions that to further understand them, the tool set that you want to use are evaluations, meaning that you're going to have a set of prompts in your AI coach, and those prompts will interact with the user, and you want to evaluate and give scores to how well your AI coach responds to the user. And we're thinking of is like there's like a lot of metrics available. One of my favorite libraries is called DeepEval, and I'll just read off a couple of the metrics that they have for conversational metrics. They have role adherence, knowledge retention, conversational completeness, conversational relevancy. Those are some like the core conversational chatbot metrics that are tested to make sure that your evals are running and passing and your prompts are doing what you want. You can also do custom metrics, and some of the custom metrics that we're thinking about are personalization. I want to know how well does my chatbot understand the user that it's talking to. And so like one of the top ones is like, can I identify them instead of knowable user cohorts, or like how quickly they match like an existing profile of other customers in my database, so that I know like, and we've been talking about, you could have cohorts that might be like goal oriented, like I want to lose weight, or I want to be a better sleeper, or I want to stop drinking alcohol. These are all like a metaphysical set of habits, version of self, set of habits, identity that you are, to an identity that you want to become, right? And we can identify that. And by the way, I think one of the key things that TikTok does so well is that from your attention data, it can automatically group you into different audiences and to show you relevant activity. So these are like, it's a very useful tool set. So we built the personalization metric for that, personalization evaluation metric for understanding who the user are, what cohort they belong to. But then there's a whole other set of metrics, like how well do I understand the user's current behaviors, as in their habits in their life and what they live? How well do I understand the user's beliefs of how they can change themselves? And then there's a whole set of metrics we calling like alignment metrics. And I think of these as the set of epistemic emotions. And how well aligned is like the user's capability to learn, to be surprised, to engage in curiosity, so that we don't hit them with confusion. Because confusion is this like sort of like mark that the AI doesn't understand you very well, and it's feeding you information that's confusing you. And that's like, you're kind of unaligned. You're not like vibing together right well, right? So the base state that you want in an AI coach is that you understand the user's beliefs, and that you can ask them questions and engage and give them information that are relevant to the belief system that they have. And that's like belief coherence and belief confirmation. So this fundamental epistemic emotion of belief confirmation, it should be the baseline of how a coach that understands the user works. Okay, so yeah, we're taking these kind of personalization metrics, making them as evaluation tool, and then creating an evaluation harness where you can train your coach to like, train your AI coach to, act in a way that it can understand your user better. And that allows you to update your prompts and build better user experiences.
We've already talked about this, but for the benefit of the audience, I'm just going to go ahead and ask this planted question. So it basically sounds like starting with the beliefs first and understanding that and modeling that out is the key to eliminating time to value to understanding your user as a chatbot developer or app developer that is tasked with building a chatbot and getting them in this loop where the chatbot keeps asking them the next best thing to uncover more, to learn more. And then you keep building that out. And basically that should be the value hypothesis for Epistemic Me, right? Like that's basically what we came to for the audience. I got back from Don't Die Miami, learned a lot about users, had a lot of recordings, had a lot of voice memos that I made coming out of user research sessions. And then I stopped by San Francisco. I live in Oakland. Jonathan lives in San Francisco. I stopped in San Francisco. We had a long lunch where we talked about all these things. And we saw that there's an opportunity there because these different tool sets out there aren't looking at it this way. And specifically for the chatbot use case, and in our case, AI health coach chatbot use case, our hypothesis became we can eliminate time to understand your users because all parts of this engine of we get some information about you, the user, chatbot understands you better. It asks you the next best thing to uncover more learnings. And then we just get into this virtuous cycle. So do you want to expound on that and sort of the vision you saw there when you were working on DP Vals and seeing some of these tool chains out there and what they offer today?
Oh yeah. So when you say that, can you give me a bit of a prompt?
Bio hypothesis of let's start with the beliefs, and then that makes this whole learning engine, I'll just say, a lot smoother.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, value hypothesis of a conversational chatbot, starting with the learning about the beliefs of a user. But I think we've even talked about this as like an onboarding tool, right? Where the minute that you meet the user, you can start to dig into who they are and why they're there, and help them engage in the right ways to create the right community experience that you want. So, I mean, I think a big part of our thesis with Epistemic Me is that belief systems help us understand how a user is going to interpret information and how much value they'll get out of something. But it helps you to know what they'll understand and what they can learn and how they're going to learn. And when it comes to an AI coach, what effectively is a recommendation system, right? So this value hypothesis of how a coach recommends certain things that you can change about your behavior and in your life, it has to meet someplace that makes sense to you. It has to understand A, where you're at, B, where you're going, and see how you can get there in a way that's adherent. And I think when we interview these doctors, right, you see the real the challenge of meeting somebody in their world, where doctors have this immense knowledge of the body and the interactions of different drugs and surgeries, all the ways that they can help you be more healthy, at least in the conventional medicine or functional medicine sense. And the real challenge is how do I give somebody a plan that they can adhere to that's actually going to help them, that I'm understanding the fullness and the complexity of where they're at. And so I think starting with belief systems is the best way to think about building a recommendation system that you can train that actually meets people where they're at.
It's so exciting because we've talked about this for a few months now that, hey, starting with beliefs is really how we solve AI alignment. And then, okay, because, we live in capitalism, we got to figure out a way to propel our project forward. And we have this strong hypothesis that, especially in health, personalization, hyper-personalization in particular, is such a needed thing. There's such a pain point out there. If you think about, we talk about this a lot offline, off the pod, but thought experiment of why does somebody go to a fitness coach? If we could simulate that, but in an AI coach and do it even better, can we do it even better? Well, first we got to start with the beliefs, because what does the coach do? They get to know the person. They get to know the person that needs coaching. And for example, if somebody has limiting beliefs around sleep, hey, I could totally eat before bed. I'm just that I have those genetics or whatever. I could just totally eat before bed. It doesn't affect me. And then this coach, longevity coach, maybe is oh, hey, why do you think that? And then starts teasing it out. But that takes some conversations. That's a lot of dialectics, right, to get to that. And there's a lot of human biases that might even go into that. And so basically, that coach as well can only do that in a one-on-one session. So what if that coach wanted to scale their philosophy around longevity and their services to their clients. Like obviously AI is the next step. And then the question is, how do we hyper personalize that experience still where it feels one to one? You're uncovering my beliefs and you're giving me the next best recommendation, which is maybe listen to an Andrew Huberman podcast, because I, as a coach, assess that you come from a scientific background. You're probably more likely to listen to somebody else that has, a PhD in some hard science that you would respect. And then you listen to that, you learn that, oh, wait, it's all about resting heart rate before I go to bed. That improves my restorative sleep and total sleep time. Oh, wait, resting heart rate is a function as well of if I eat right before bed, my resting heart rate's going to be higher because my heart needs to pump blood to be able to process the calories and ATP, that kind of thing, right? So that's what a coach has to do. And then we're basically saying Epistemic Me, starting with the belief system, will help the chatbot coach that experience meet the user right where they're at. Because if it's powered by Epistemic Me, we will model that user's belief system and the target that they want to get to, which is I want to sleep better. But I currently don't. I have all these thoughts about sleep currently. So it's really cool to see the value hypothesis being played out in real time, where I got to actually test it with users. And I learned so much from that, where every user I talked to, where they used it, and right now it's early, so it's still generic-ish. We still need to get reps up on the front end and on the SDK. Every user I talking about health is so personal, right? They all have certain goals and they all believe and they rightly should believe that they're basically a unique snowflake and they need some unique answer for their particular goal. So the value hypothesis, solution hypotheses are getting stronger over time. I feel really stoked about that, Jonathan. And I want to say, you mentioned alignment metrics. Do you want to tell the audience where that the naming of that came from? That might be just like a little fun Easter egg for the audience.
Yeah, like can I add on to what you were saying about the
Please, please.
meeting the user where they're they how they evidence their beliefs, I guess, is like
Yeah.
these are two of the different alignment metrics that I created are one is belief verification and then belief evidencing. And in both of these, you're trying to see like how does the user or the patient think about like how they evidence their beliefs. Is it from their experience? Like this is one epistemological approach is that, well, like I do this every day and I see these outcomes and like this works for me. Like I'm an N of one. Other users might be more scientific, like you said, and they might come from a background where they are only going to trust scientific research or randomized control trials. And I think you want to be able to understand how the user's thinking and how they're going to ground their own beliefs and be able to, and like what kind of verification theorem they're doing to understand that these beliefs are true in the world. So those are literally like two evaluation metrics that we put on the conversational evals to say, what do we know? And I expect these to be like really low because I think this is an area of improvement. And if you think about like building out the complexity of the graph of the epistemology of a user and how well you understand them, I don't think there's the incentive or the sort of like benefit in like really understanding users' depths so far. But with the way that AI is evolving, I think that we can definitely start to like leverage that and meet people more deeply where they ground their beliefs in evidence and really trust something. So that obviously helps people question their beliefs too. Like what kind of evidence are you using, right? And if they have to answer these questions themselves, like, oh, wait, I'm sitting on some dogma here, right? That's what you
Yeah.
really want people to see is like, I've been sitting on some useful dogma here, and there's maybe a better evidencing path that now that I'm examining this, I can actually answer this question a little bit better for myself. That's me learning, right? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so the alignment metrics then like is like putting the user in a place where their mind is like it's continuing to like foster learning and in a way that's constructive. But I think this whole like the whole idea and the naming of vibe coding really captured me. Andres Karpathy calling it vibe coding because like if you think about like for me, I'm vibing with my media if I'm continually like building on my thoughts and like I'm finding things that verify my beliefs. I'm finding curiosities that I would need to explore. I'm getting surprised by things that I didn't know, but I'm not feeling a feeling of vibing when I'm confused and I'm tripped up on something. And when I, especially like when you use Cursor right now, and you're kind of in a flow and you're like, say, going through a feedback loop to have Cursor test some code that you just wrote or something like that. When it gets stuck in these loops where it's like just trying to like move some string over to some arbitrary place, and it's like, dude, like you're killing my vibe.
Yeah. We were just vibing, bro. Like, what's going
Yeah,
on?
everything was working just fine until you start, right? I mean, And I think it's early days for this kind of feeling. But okay, there's a human machine interaction where like I'm staying in a place that I'm sort of like epistemically vibing with the experience. And the minute that you throw a wrench in and you confuse somebody, like then all of a sudden that alignment breaks. So I think this idea of like epistemic vibing and the idea of alignment metrics was like a thought experiment of mine recently. And I wonder like if this kind of like meme idea of vibe coding is actually going to become our working definition of AI alignment in a lot of directions.
Yeah.
Because
And-
like, and we know that that the coders on the front line of this user experience, right? We're seeing things now that other users might not see in their writing in their lives for a couple of years.
Yeah,
But this is it's the fundamental human interaction and the AI alignment that we're talking about. So yeah, here we
totally.
go, alignment metrics.
Alignment metrics. Yeah. Another Easter egg is we almost named my newsletter self-aligned because me and Jonathan nerd out a lot about things, and we were talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs one day. And I was like, I think there's something beyond self-actualization. It's not enough for this next era. And then Jonathan came up with this great term. What about being self-aligned? I was like, oh, that's perfect. That's so good. And so we've just latched on to this name for a while and tried to figure out where else could we put align, because we want to solve AI alignment. Where else could we kind of fit this in? And it totally makes sense for this type of personalization use case. So it's really perfect. Um, we'll obviously have to, go to market and test it out at scale to see if it makes sense to the ICP when they read it. But like internally right now, currently makes sense to us. And it's a cool name. I wanted to touch on epistemic emotions for a sec, mainly because I think the audience hearing it might not quite understand what that means. But you defined it. There's a few things there like surprise, confusion, etc. Things that maybe take you out of an experience, right? And I also wanted to combine that with the concept of the zone of proximal development. When you
Mm.
were talking about vibe coding, or even before that, let's talk about vibing with a coach, right? Everybody can imagine you have a therapist, you have a coach, you have some sort of provider. It's kind of like dating where you have to have the right vibe, right? Otherwise, the service doesn't go well. Okay, so let's map that to an AI health coach. What if you tell it that, you don't believe that uh, eating right before bed affects your sleep, and then it bombards you. Let's say you're not scientific, and then it bombards you with a bunch of scientific jargon. It probably didn't meet you exactly where you need to be to learn a little bit more, which is exactly in that zone of proximal development. It probably went well beyond that, and then that instigates these epistemic emotions of like, I'm super confused now, kind of ruined the vibe. I might try a different AI health coach, right? That's how I kind of thought about it as you were talking about the vibing thing, and then hey, this is really just about how are you evidencing your belief. Oh, that's a piece of dogma. Oh, okay, this doesn't serve me anymore. I have the right evidence at the right time. The coach presents it to me. It meets me where I'm at. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there and get your thought on epistemic emotions meets proximal zone of development meets how do I grow the user. What are your thoughts on that, Jonathan?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. But I had a relatable experience recently, like when you talked about like being say, overwhelmed with evidence. Uh,
Yeah.
so when I'm on Twitter, I'll frequently like use Grok and say, "Can you fact check these claims?" And I read a lot of scientific, and Grok is just like, "Here's all the evidence, and here's the supporting evidence," and I'm just like, "There's no way like I could actually." Like intake all of this information and ground it to my beliefs and like walk away from this having like sort of an evolved learning pattern. But it's useful in the fact that I know the data is there, and maybe you can check it up later. So, and I think it's an example of like where like you just like positive proximal zone of development there is going to like incrementally and additively like extend the evidence that you can apply towards your beliefs in ways that you can come back to them in the future, right? So the language of epistemic emotions, we talked about this with Bishoy on a previous podcast, and he's the one who introduced me to the term. He's a psychiatrist, but it's a term used in education to like modify how well somebody is able to learn something in a given domain. And the words involve belief confirmation, surprise, confusion, curiosity. There may be one or two others, but there's a pretty limited set of like states you can be in. And when we come to proximal development, um, let's say that you're I always imagine somebody like in a Baptist church, Southern Baptist church, like, amen, amen, like it's belief confirmation after belief confirmation. Everything the pastor's saying is like, it's like just gold to
Gets
their
you
ears.
going. Yeah.
Yeah, like they're totally vibing, right? But they're maybe not learning something, and I think that's where there's a little bit of grit involved. And so, how do you introduce grit into the learning process so that it's like optimal? And I think there's a lot of different studies that have kind of like tried to address this through different frameworks. But the one I like thinking about, surprise is one that if you have like sort of like a randomized surprise quotient that can hit your dopamine, kind of like almost in a gamification dynamic, then like is like, oh, like I didn't know that. But it's like if you hit somebody with surprise after surprise after surprise, right, that's not optimal. They're not going to be able to sort of like take in all that information. And then you want to leave some room for curiosity, which is like, like, oh, I never thought about that. Let me go and explore this and see if I need to update my beliefs, to like, so belief updating is expensive and it's hard, and we all have resistance to it. You really have to kind of like, say in a given learning engagement session to hit that optimal zone of development, you have to kind of like mix the belief confirmations and surprises and the curiosities in just the right way so that it sort of meets the domain the person's at, and the amount of time that they have, the amount of energy they can expend. And it kind of like it meets them emotionally, right? And because why epistemic emotion is such a like a valuable lens.
Definitely, definitely. As you said that, there's so many things around this to figure out what is the next best thing to give you,
Yeah.
right? And that's why, come back to it, we're pretty solid. We feel very confident in our hypothesis that to do that really well, to help a user grow beyond limiting beliefs or become their better self step by step, and at every step and every big step in between, we have to know what their beliefs are and what are the evidence points for their beliefs, right? So that we could predict what's the next best thing to give this user to help them grow towards their target self. So the more that we test these ideas out in the wild and see them actually now coming back from the summit, seeing them play out in real time, totally adds more evidence points on my belief that we're going the right way. So I'm pretty stoked about that. I know we have lots to get through probably in the next half hour. So I'll just give a really quick flyby. So, real quick, basically, I learned that hyperpersonalization is the key. And people come to Don't Die for different things. They want to become a better version of themselves. Some are founders that are trying to hyper optimize their lives so that they have better chance of success. Some are people that have been burnt out by previous corporate culture and being a workaholic, and now they just want to become their healthiest self, increase their lifespan, their health span. And then even that looks different to people. Some people are going full on, let me go be like Brian, where I'm super disciplined. I got the red lights in the home. I'm vegan, whatever. Some people are like, okay, that's like 100%. I'll be at like 20 and I'm cool. Um, Women want, for example, they want to know that this is for them. That meant a lot. Some people are just trying to find friends that are kind of longevity nerds too, that validate their existence of, I don't go to bars, I don't drink, I go to bed on time, or I do some combination, or maybe even one of those things, right? And so it basically gave us this more confidence that with this, what we're calling enrichment as a service, where we can give you personalization metrics, alignment metrics to close out these loops quicker, to learn about your users a lot quicker as a chatbot developer, let's say generically. In this particular case, it's the AI health coach use case. That beliefs are really the key. And then we could even group people by belief cohorts, right? So I thought that was such a cool learning where I got to go meet all these different users, test AI Brian with them, and all of them had, varying goals, and there were buckets of goals, but the paths to those goals, they all wanted those to be hyper personalized, which was a cool learning for me. Awesome. Okay, so just wrapping that up, um, let's talk about consciousness. So that was the build in public update. Jonathan and I have been thinking about consciousness. He picked up a book. I am behind, but that's going to be our next Epistemic Me book club. If you are interested in joining it, we'll probably have a Slack channel that's public and out in the open soon. So maybe by the time this pod is out, or perhaps a little later, look out for some news there on the podcast or on my newsletter or our website. But we try to read books regularly. We actually finished Mastery and Super Agency. We got to record a podcast or something on Super Agency. Um, I got introduced to this idea of, can consciousness be modeled by quantum computing to make humanoid robots be more alive? That was wild. I learned about this at the Don't Die Summit, and I texted Jonathan the podcast that I learned about right away. We both listened to it. I listened on the plane on the way back. Jonathan listened to it. We talked about it over dinner, over lunch. And so let me just talk about consciousness for a little bit to like give a brief history of what that means, just to define it, and then I would love to kind of talk about consciousness at the intersection of AI and philosophy with Jonathan. So, okay, what is consciousness? Consciousness is typically defined as a subjective experience, the felt sense of being or having an inner world. The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" In a previous podcast, we actually asked that to ChatGPT and had a whole discussion with Dean on that, Jonathan, myself, and Dean. And that's the test. If there's something it is like to be a thing, then that thing is conscious, right? So it's not just about information processing, it's awareness of the world, of the self, of feeling. And so, okay, brief history of consciousness. And I don't know the depths of all of these, so I'm going to give a super high flyby of this to bring us to quantum computing meets AI consciousness, which is a very interesting topic. So to understand where we're at today, got to go back a little bit, rapid fire through of how consciousness has been treated in philosophy. So Plato and Descartes talked about dualism. Consciousness was separate from the body, a soul or mind being distinct from the physical. Okay, Hume shattered the self, and he said consciousness is more like a stream of impressions, and there is no fixed I underneath it all. Kant argued that consciousness shapes reality. We don't perceive the world as it is, we perceive it as filtered through our minds. Phenomenology says, and this is through the work of Heidegger and many others, phenomenology says, put experience front and center. Consciousness is not just in the head, it's embodied and embedded in the world. Okay. And then we move into cognitive science. So cognitive science says, let's treat consciousness as an emerging product of brain processes, more like a user interface than kind of a ghost in the machine that we can't quite explain, but we accept. And then David Chalmers coined the hard problem phrase, how and why does subjective experience arise from physical matter? Okay, cool. So that's like, and there's lots of in between, and there's lots of depth for all those things. And we'll link in the show notes. There's a really great Stanford Encyclopedia of Knowledge around the history of consciousness. I read up on that on my flight back from Don't Die Miami. So I'll link that in the show notes. So that brings us to now. We're on the verge of giving birth to superintelligence. And so some of the brightest minds in technology are thinking about, in particular, Suzanne Gildert. She has this company, is it Nirvanica? Was it? Who is trying to instill consciousness into humanoid robots via quantum computing. And her whole thesis is, I don't think we could solve this in traditional models. I think we got to look at this with quantum computing. And I thought that was really fascinating. So, okay, let me just pause there and get your reaction. What are your thoughts on consciousness, history of consciousness, and then maybe also very pointedly, consciousness at the intersection of quantum computing? We had a very deep discussion about this, and Jonathan has great thoughts about it.
Yeah, it's a pretty big surface area. I'm not sure exactly where I want to start, but the I think one thing that's interesting to point out is I think that consciousness, as it's like studied scientifically from a neuroscience perspective, you might assume that consciousness is unique to like the state of being human. And then so that's one end of the scientific spectrum. And then on another side of the philosophy, like say modern philosophers like Donald Hoffman, Michael Levin, they're saying like consciousness is fundamental, like in that, our physical brain is not what gives us consciousness. It is like a container for the conscious behavior that is constantly, interacting. And I think the most useful definition of consciousness is like that is any being that can have an experience, that can have experience. There's a lot of confusion about what the word means. We're in a place now where I think anybody that has curiosity that is really being scientific about it, cannot dismiss the possibility that that consciousness is what is fundamental about reality, and that materialism is a result of that. And that's opposite to the epistemology of like anybody that has a PhD, anybody that has a master's degree is sort of like locked into this epistemic sort of like ideology that says scientific method, like, there's not a way to understand consciousness as being fundamental. I'll say that. I think where Gildert came in with her company, Nirvanica, the conscious, she's talking about embodied cognition, embodied consciousness. And I think this is a reasonable approach to say that, well, all the things that we see that we can sort of identify that have lived experiences, and I'll get to that in a second, like how do you know something has a lived experience? But, like any nervous system you see on the planet has this evolutionary history behind it, that it has embodiment and it has movement as the primary like foundation of what the nervous system is doing. This goes back to like the proto fish brain, and this goes back even to the cellular life, right? Like the the dynamics of locomotion and being able to move your body through space in order to, like, say, find food or escape threats is fundamental to the survival. And I think Carl Friston really like enumerates this really well. And we've talked about this before, is like, if you're a cell or you're a fish and you're moving closer to your food, you don't see yourself from the outside moving like from point A to point B. You see your environment changing in a way that the food is getting closer to you. So what's happening with consciousness is that we have a model of self in the world, and we have a model of world in the self. And the intersection of those two things gives us this sort of like conscious identity about how we can actuate the world in order to meet our goals, be it metabolic or survival or otherwise. And so I think, you can look at cells, you can look at fish, you can look at all, like life on the planet, and you can see this pattern of like where consciousness found evolutionary fitness and sort of passed on the behavior of learned experience to actuate your environment through perception and actuation. In order to like have a fitness function. So I guess I'll start there. We can go in a couple different directions.
Let's also add in, before we move on from this, because you mentioned Friston, let's add in the free energy principle. Could you tell me about that at the intersection of what you just said, the cell, the fish, the locomotion, like your environments, you don't see yourself from the outside. Let's add that in, because I know much of the audience has probably not heard about us talk about that before, but that is something that comes up in our conversations, the free energy principle.
Yeah, I think so. This is Carl Friston's work. Carl Friston is the most cited neuroscientist in the world, largely for his work in the early MRIs of neurons, and all the work that cites his work. But as he was looking at how neurons behave, he saw these excitation, potentials that were predicting the world around it. So the neurons aren't waiting for like some stimulus of sensory information to hit it and then responding. They're rather predicting what's going to happen in the world. So the neuron actually has some memory of a world model that it's firing. It's firing. And so Christian took that and he put it into a statistical mechanical model called the free energy principle, and it can it can define the behavior of anything in the world. And those memories that I talked about that the neuron might have are stored in what's called the belief system, right? And that's how we mean belief system, epistemic me. It is not like just epistemic beliefs for a human. These are epistemic beliefs for any type of conscious being. That's how flexible the model is meant to be. And so. Yeah. Through this interaction with the world, the Christian defines what's called a Markov blanket. And this is a statistical definition of its boundary between what is the environment and what is the world. And then so through that Markov blanket, it can perceive information and it can actuate information in order to like fulfill the belief expectations it has of the world, and basically create a survival function for itself.
Yeah. AKA, let me get that food. I'm this fish. I'm hungry, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But at every level too, what the fish is made of as well at the cellular level. Real quick flyby, just because you mentioned it, and maybe the audience doesn't know this. But so far in this podcast in particular, we have talked about belief systems at the intersection of a human belief, a human agent or self model. And you just referenced that epistemic me as a data model. That's really our bread and butter, where this is not just confined to humans. Could you tell the audience a little bit about that? And then we'll get back on course about conscious.
Yeah, I think there's a construct in our code called the self model. and it contains a belief system. And I think you could, in theory, model cellular behavior with the self model and with its belief system. Um, so it's just a matter of constructing the environments and the response mechanisms, between the self model and the world. So you can think about making a digital twin of anything, of anything sentient, of any being, of anything that has consciousness, anything that has lived experience, and it has like Frischton describes these as like oscillations. Um, you know, like in the sense that there are like statistical mechanical oscillations of the world. There's also the term OODA loop, observe, oriented, decide, and act. There, but however you want to think about it, like there is a constant, continual sort of like perception of the world being predicted by our belief systems, and this self-model construct we have is like meant to kind of embody that.
We got a dope data model. That's it. That's what I just wanted on that real quick. And hopefully one day we are able to uh, not just help you reduce your biomarkers, but also when the sensor technology gets good enough, maybe we can actually model your cells and your mitochondria and your metabolism. And then all of that could help us predict even better how do you become a better version of yourself / healthier version of yourself. Okay, so come back to consciousness. Uh, this is an interesting question I wrote down. Um, if Suzanne Gilder, consciousness meets quantum computing in humanoid robots, that's what she's exploring. She says maybe consciousness didn't emerge from intelligence. Maybe it preceded it. Maybe it generated it. I would love to hear your reaction to that. That was
Yeah.
quite profound when I heard it.
Yeah, I think the first time I heard the idea articulated this way, it was Donald Hoffman's work, and so I think he's done a really great job of, from the direction of a scientist of perception, saying, "Here's what we have evidence for. I just can't, I need to now explore the hypothesis that consciousness is fundamental in order to do scientific work going forward." And um, then I was just this week, Annika Harris, who is Sam Harris's wife, she just released this book, Lights On, and the whole theme of it is consciousness fundamental, and it means that consciousness preceded like physical materialism, and the whole idea of hard problem of consciousness is like,
Yeah.
how do we get from non-living matter into this like conscious brain that we have, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so the whole idea flips it on its head and says like that question doesn't matter at all. Like if consciousness is fundamental, our problem of consciousness doesn't exist. So Hoffman's been saying this for years, and I think like the recapitulation of his ideas now kind of spreading through other people
His
is
consciousness
helping me see it
is
better. Yeah,
growing through society.
right.
Like if you think of all of us as self models or agents, right? Like all of us are, we have these beliefs, we put them out there, and then the belief systems of a group, collective, nations, etc. That might change over time. That's kind of what I was saying. Okay, yeah, that was really really interesting to me. So,
And
yeah, go ahead.
there's one data point I want to point there that like Hoffman constantly points to is that there's not a single example of where you can like take a qualia, like what is the color red, or what how do I feel when I feel hungry, and relate that back to a neural representation in the brain. Like we have not in science found a single representation of that yet. If you're really wanting to be scientific about like what consciousness is, you can't just say that our brain creates consciousness. There's no evidence of it, right? So I
Yeah.
mean, that's where the philosophy starts to help a lot. It starts to help like frame new questions and new hypotheses of how to make sense of all this.
Totally, because truth, as we talk about in the pod, is a process, right? And maybe one day we find scientific evidence, but
Yeah.
currently it's not there. So it's an evolving truth. But okay, this is also an interesting one. Back to quantum computing meets consciousness meets humanoid robots. So Gilder was saying like she has this hypothesis that in the podcast, which we'll link in the show notes, it was wonderful. She talked about how robots in the home would be such a cool problem to solve. And I was like, yeah, from a product perspective, obviously, because she was saying when she talks to, users or other people, friends, it's like, well, what if a robot just helped you do all your chores? They're like, hell yeah, let's bring it in. Yeah, like they will just automate all my chores, do my dishes, like do my laundry. That's great. But then that presupposes that it can do these things. And right now, robotics are very limited to set tasks like fold this shirt in this guardrailed way. But to be human, it's like, think about doing your dirty dishes. What if they piled up in very different ways? The dishes are very different house to house. The type of food on it is going to be different. Maybe the sponges or soap is going to be different, whatever. So she's saying, well, if we solve the consciousness problem, where this could become more like humans, when we instill that in a robot, then it would become very useful and it would be able to intelligently do these tests. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Well, first of all, would you have a humanoid robot in your house? And then second of all, what are your thoughts on quantum computing to solve that problem?
Yeah, interesting. So I love the premise and like the idea that it's really like not a fixed task to be able to do something like cleaning your home, for instance. Cleaning your home requires a lot of cognition and dynamic capabilities and processing. And I think, like we've talked about, where subjectivity really lies, and I think that domestication, as in like how do we manage our domestic environment, make sure that it's clean, make sure that it has food stocked, that you have comfortable like sort of living environment, lighting, these are all subjective qualities of like how we live our life. So for a robot to learn these things and then like be able to like sort of nurture our domestic environment for us is a very complex test. It's a great thought experiment. I think the idea of a humanoid robot, like I'm still a little skeptical. I know that we've made some pretty interesting advances in humanoid robots recently, but I think the humanoid form evolved like when Homo erectus, evolved from apes to create, bipedal locomotion, and there's a specific adaptation ability to that and a specific like reason for that. And I think if you're building something that's going to now clean the new domestic environment of the humans that live in, like what's to say that like a swarm of insects isn't better suited than a bipedal humanoid robot to solve this problem. I don't think there's like really any answers to that, but I think there are going to be a lot of hypotheses, and I think especially Michael Levin says like that just the permutations of different forms of life and combinations of life and technology that we're going to see going forward is unfathomable. And I think that's one of the realities of like the next maybe 50 years, that people aren't sci-fiing enough in current terms of imagining the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that as a phrase. We need to sci-fi more. People aren't sci-fiing enough.
Yeah, sci-fi in that direction. Yeah, totally.
No, yeah, we need for futurists to sci-fi us to the future. Um, that's funny. Wait, you didn't answer though. Would you have one in your house? Like, let's say, like tomorrow, they're on Amazon for like what you can
Well,
afford, and it could do your dishes, make you food. Would you do that?
I mean, I had a Roomba in my house. I think like, yeah, I think what'll really be like, it's because of the subjectivity. Like, I think we're going to see these things as an augmentation of self. Like they will be tools. They have to be highly integrated with both us, our cycles, sleep cycles, the work that we're doing. And like, I think that's where they end up at. And yeah, I think like, so it'll be a wearable that cleans my house, through some set of like robotic features. Cool. I'm in. Yeah, totally.
Wearable that cleans my house. That's funny that you even thought about it that way. Like, oh, this is just another tool, like a
Yeah.
wearable. That's funny. Okay. That brings to mind an entrepreneur that I made friends with at one of these summits, who has in one of his portfolio companies, they're trying to make a Pokemon for your house that will do things like this in your house. And I gotta say, I've always wanted my own Pokemon because I grew up with Pokemon, like just watching it and stuff. And I always wanted a Charmander for sure. I don't want it to burn down my house, so that's one. But I've always thought that would be the cutest thing, is to have your own Charmander just kind of following you around like char, or like, oh yeah, I gotta light this thing, boom, and then maybe it does lots of other cool things. Maybe it could fly me around and stuff. When I was a kid, I was thinking these things. Also, for the viewers, I know Charmander can't fly; it has to evolve to Charizard. Just quick nerd take to correct that, because I know on the record I'll probably get called out. Okay, back to this. One of the questions that I had kind of written down here is, do you think emotion, intuition, or gut feeling will ever be replicable in AI, or are those irreducibly human?
So emotion, intuition, and gut feeling, are they
Yeah,
replicable in AI? As
yeah,
as in, can AI feel it for us, or
yeah,
can our digital twin experience that feeling?
yeah,
I've been thinking about the replicate, like where did AI create consciousness? I think that's an interesting thing. But
right.
the answer is no. It's augmenting our own consciousness until we form some sort of methodology for like being able to generate consciousness. And so yeah, I guess that's my answer. And I'm happy to talk about like, why I've
So,
been thinking about, well, okay. One of the conversations of consciousness I was listening to was Christoph Koch on Sean Carroll's podcast. And they were talking about the theory of IIT, integrated information theory. There's a lot of things about IIT I like, but one of the things it just seems to miss is like, what are the criteria of like systems that we can evaluate consciousness towards? Um, like they were talking about an example of a transistor gate. Like, well, the transistor gate has input and output information. It has a score on the IIT scale, right? But why am I wasting my time talking about whether this transistor gate is conscious? Like, it doesn't even meet like my like heuristic test. Like,
yeah,
it
yeah.
doesn't have experiences. It doesn't self-actuate its environment. Doesn't have a model of self, model of environment that can sort of like, you need something that can have experiences that can actuate metabolism in ways to continue having more experiences. And so
Mm,
like
mm,
anything I think of, like it has a parent, right? Has an ancestry of other things that were also conscious. So why would we play these silly games and like, talk about whether plates or transistor gates
mm,
or might be, you're right. I think there's definitely like limitations you can put onto that. So in that area of things that like I might consider conscious, like let's say I have limitations that your parents had to be conscious for you to be conscious. Everything conscious I know has that sort of characteristic. And you have to have experiences to have consciousness. So now I need a way of like being able to like sort of evaluate something that has a living metabolism and understand that it has experiences and ways to measure that. And that's a really interesting thought experiment. And but I think that there's also like sort of a random permutation experiment that you can run to say like, can natural selection just have such a large population of things that it would like mutate into a higher level of consciousness or something like that.
mhm,
And this is where I think if I was to run AI experiments to say, can I make some of these conscious? I would have this sort of like simulation I would run over and over and over again until it could start to actuate its environment, like in a robotic sense, so that it could start to demonstrate experience, so that it could replicate something, and then it would have offspring that would have the same behavior, right? And I think if you just kept on mutating those permutations, like like huge populations across scale, that you could go from something that like is a computer program that's obviously not conscious to like, we can't differentiate that this is not conscious anymore. And
mm.
that's how I would sort of like think about the thought experiment.
Yeah, it's almost like we create a new Turing test, right? Dean had a really great thought experiment, which was, what did you say? Did you say something like, could we take away all of its knowledge about science and physics, and then could it recreate the theory of general relativity? Right. That's what he was saying would be like, that would be believable as intelligence. Yeah. So now it's like, all right, maybe it's both.
Well, I think, yeah, intelligence and consciousness are like kind of two different things, but they have overlapping qualities, right? But I think,
Could you expound on that?
yeah, I mean, I just think at a minimum, you're thinking, can something conscious behave in a way that keeps itself alive and keeps continued experiential behaviors happening? And it doesn't have to be intelligence in the sense that it can create a theory of general relativity in order to do that, right? But if like understanding general relativity helps it to maintain its
Survive.
stasis with the world, yeah. Carl Friston uses this word, the Red Queen dance, which is a term that comes from Alice in Wonderland, where I think there's a character that's running in place, and she's saying, "It's taking everything I have to run in place." And it's a
Mm,
quote, and like that's what consciousness is. It's just like you're a part of the universe that is like every part of your being is oscillating and having experiences just to continue to be and to continue to evolve, right? And so, yeah, I don't need it to solve general relativity unless that's gonna that's gonna help me do the Red Queen dance.
How do you think about this at the intersection of purpose? Because, okay, meta in a way, why are we choosing to be on the pod, right? It's because we want to be solving AI alignment for the world so that we all don't die. Well, actually, now I'm even answering my own question. So I guess this is part of our survival mechanism. So free energy principle says Robert and Jonathan got together and we're combining our brain power to solve AI alignment. Yeah, I just answered my own question. So I guess part of this is just spreading our message out. And we believe that will help us to solve AI alignment and reduce existential risk for humanity and therefore ourselves.
Yeah, I think we're actively working towards emergent consciousness. Like that's what civilization is. And I think there's a world in which consciousness can emerge where that is far more advanced than what we are today, and either sees us as pets or just doesn't need us at all. Or there's a world where consciousness emerges that is like actively augmenting and integrating what human consciousness means into this higher level of consciousness. And I think like the way of AI is evolving, we just live at a unique intersection in time where like this new the potential for this new consciousness is like kind of in our hands. I mean, sort of. It's more like that we're actively living and experiencing this thing, and I think yeah, we just need to throw out the evolutionary hypotheses and sort of let them compete for fitness.
For sure. For sure. So many thoughts. So many thoughts. There's so many threads on this. And we went away from the robots and quantum computing. And now we're thinking about this, which is interesting. Yeah, there's so many things. Okay, let me just go back to grounding us. So we talked about free energy principle. We talked about the difference between intelligence and consciousness. One thing I wanted to zone in on, you said you picked up that book, and you learned something interesting. Yeah, and you said you got to chapter 4, and there was something interesting there. Could you tell me more about it?
Yeah, well, the whole book has been interesting in the sense that Annika is just testing her own beliefs and then talking to like the foremost experts in the field. And so I really enjoyed her conversation with the physicist about like dual split experiment and like Schrodinger's cat. Um,
Oh, cool.
like, by the way, why do we assume Schrodinger's cat is half dead and half alive? We can just ask the cat, right? Like that's kind of, I mean, like it's conscious. It's the only one that knows. But then in chapter 4 it gets into like the consciousness of plants, and I thought there was interesting idea about like just how plants, as simple as they seem to be, right, are reacting to their environment. They're self-actuating. They're expanding and bending cells according to light and shade dynamics. And one scientist, I need to look into this more, but it was just really interesting that some of the same pain medications that work on humans also work on plants to subdue the pain signal. Isn't that absurd?
That's wild. What? Holy
It's
shit.
And then the basic idea is that the mechanism that it works on humans is it basically can kind of like shut down an ion channel that is sending a pain signal, and that the plant happens to use a very similar ion channel to like recognize pain. I don't know. It seems like kind of out there, but this is just a biological researcher using the language of his domain to describe the behavior of a plant to Annika. So, it's really interesting.
My plant not been a good plant dad. A couple of them are wilting. I've felt some pain in my identity as a plant dad for this. And
Yeah.
maybe I got to buy some of these painkillers.
I mean, you can't have empathy for everything in the world at once, unfortunately. But yeah, but consciousness is happening everywhere.
Totally. Back to that question about Schrodinger's cat, was what they asked, which is, why don't we just ask the cat? Was that
Oh,
more
that was
from
me. Yeah.
Oh, you said that. Okay, wait, tell me more about that. Because I have a thought of like why you would say that, but I wanted to know more.
Well, the whole thought experiment is like that there's a cat in a box and it's dead or alive. And it's like this objective notion of what a cat is, like if we build a self model of a cat, the cat is like undergoing all these homeostatic processes as it's in the box and is falling, to its potential demise. Right.
Yeah.
Like the only thing that we really know, the cat itself is conscious, has experiences. The cat is having experiences in the box. That's what we need to look at evidence of the cat's experiences to answer this question. That, like for us to like create multiple universes or the multi-world theory, it's like it's so crazy to me that like, okay, because we don't know that the cat is alive or dead, there's a many worlds theory that can explain this. That it's just like there's two different worlds, clearly. Like, dude, just like look at the cat. Observe the experiences of the cat. That's all we can know. If we can't observe the experiences of the cat, we can know nothing. And I think like it's just we. So what I really enjoyed about the book was it takes these thought experiments and it just kind of like looks at it through the lens of what if consciousness is first, is primary,
that's
and
right.
yeah. So it's a really cool opportunity to kind of rethink through some of these thought experiments, including quantum mechanics and on.
Oh, that's so cool. I can't wait to get my hands on this book and read it. That's awesome. Okay, I know we're getting to time to maybe close out the pod. Maybe one last question here. Were there any other, because we're on this thought experiment train, were there any other thought experiments that stuck out to you in this, or any that are in your brain that now applying that lens of what if consciousness came first? Now it just makes you rethink things.
Yeah, I have a whole other thread that I kind of want to get on. Maybe we can do another pod on it, but it's
Like
there was
let's give them a preview. What is it?
yeah. Well, there was a study recently where they put an MRI on a 12-month-old baby, and they could observe the memories forming for the first time. Like, so there's a question of like, when did babies start to form memories, and what do they look like? And so they found, in babies about 12 months old, they could start to see memories forming. They put pictures in front of babies. Babies that have seen a picture before will tend to gaze at it longer, and they could measure like the memory that way, and that like put that against the fMRI data. I mean, really interesting. And I think if you think about like what's happening in the embryonic process as the baby,
Yeah.
as consciousness as is kind of like moving through the embryonic process, and this the collective consciousness, and the first time now you have a baby, a human baby with experiences that has like hippocampal memories forming,
Mhm.
that are the impression of its new experience. Like they weren't there before. The baby wasn't conscious and having experiences the same way as it was now, maybe a
Mm.
couple months later, right? um, it's just like a preview into like what's happening to us as we evolve. And I think if you think of each individual experience having its own sort of like in-dimensional memory structure, because the experiences, the memories of these babies are nothing like the memories that you and I have, which are much more complex and built on top of years and years of experience, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
that's something we can know. That's an evidence of experience, is like the structure of memory as we go through life, and as we get older. It's just consciousness expressing itself. And this is one of the concepts that I use in the self model called the observation context, like where if you think about the imprint of the experience forming like a 1 or 2 dimensional memory for a child, and then maybe the imprint of experience of a 40-year-old man, like forming like an nth dimensional memory structure, that's built
Yeah.
on years of experience. So like
Yeah.
there's a different sort of observation of the world, different way that experience is happening. So the study got me thinking, and I think it's like helping put together these pieces of like, how do we look at self, and how do we kind of like model ourselves as the embryos that are constantly evolving and experiences evolving through our lifetime.
Let's take a 1 month old baby. How would you model that in Epistemic Me now knowing this?
Yeah, I mean, so it's got a certain nervous system imprint, right? And like,
Yeah.
what is the experience pattern of the baby? Like, it's probably very geared towards like interactions with parents, and then like it cries when it's hungry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The experience of a baby feeling hunger and crying is like the core sort of loop that I think about, because its whole actuation of the world is to like call its mommy to do
Root,
things for it, right?
trying to evolve. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So that's what it consciousness is optimizing for at that point, is just like is experiencing and actuating its parents to like get its needs fulfilled, being
Yeah.
breastfed or getting food or whatever it
Oh,
is. Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. I love how you basically, if the energy principle could explain everything.
Yeah. Well, all consciousness. I mean, yeah. And
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
if consciousness is fundamental, sure, everything.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Definitely. Were there any other threads you want to pull on there from that study leading to this evolution of thought?
Um, I think I'd like, just some help exploring this kind of idea of how consciousness and memory might interact. And then I really like Michael Levin's concept that like that memory is actually just like, say, a stored experience being saved for our future self. Like it's a communication pattern. So
Yeah.
like we think
Yeah.
about memory on a computer, it's like, oh, it fills up this sort of like a hexadecimal value on a memory transistor or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, but like memory and consciousness is just like a saved experience that's waiting for itself to be recommunicated again.
You
And
like put a message in a bottle, shipped in the sea of your brain for later.
yeah, so when you come back to that same observation context and you're in an environment where that information is relevant, it just pulls upon that. Maybe we add to it. And this is where like maybe we have a belief confirmation. Maybe we have a curiosity where we need to like add to it, right?
Exactly. That makes sense.
But
Interesting. And then why your brain stores that memory is also an interesting thought. So I suppose if we keep running with the self-actuating line of thinking, it would be, I got to remember this quantum mechanics thing to pass the class, to go to capitalism, to make money. One. For the baby, it's like I got to remember what my mom and dad looked like versus other humans. I don't got much of a brain right now, so I gotta remember them. So I cry, they come back, I trust them, I take their food, right?
Yeah, yeah. Have you heard of this phenomenon called infant amnesia, where you can't remember things from earlier in life?
No, tell
Yeah.
me.
So that was part of the study that was actually like one of the key points it was trying to point out. I guess in mice, they're able to like take infant memories and like use electrical like electrodes, and then where mice won't remember something from an infancy, it suddenly can, as if like maybe the electricity gives some extra like energy for recall of the memory or something like that. Um,
Okay.
but I think like if you just think about like the baby recognizing its environment, storing that memory, and then needing it again later, it's very possible like that our understanding the world gets more complex. We have more complex observation context, and like we sort of just never need to retrieve that memory because it's not sort of relevant to this new evolved more complex observation context that we have of the world. um, and another idea I think that might relate is that perhaps we do recall these memories, but then we just kind of like augment them and overwrite them, and
Yeah.
we don't store like sort of explicit experiences in ways that are like absolute. We just continue to like mold those set of neurons, to like be more and more complex as we see the world, and we kind of like overwrite the memories that we have as children, and don't like need them anymore, or they're just with us in a different form.
When you define child here, what's the age range? Is it like actually like adolescent to adults? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it meant like, what's your earliest memory? Like, I was talking with my wife, and she has memories from being 2 years old. My earliest memory is about like 4 or 5 years old as a child.
I remember, so I was born in Vermont. My parents immigrated from Vietnam. I spent 0 to 1 there. And then we moved to Austin, Texas, 1 to 7, something like that. 0 to 1, I have a memory sometime around there of just what Vermont snow was like. It was just so white. I remember I've had this distinct memory for the longest time, no other memory from that time period, but this very distinct memory of looking out the glass window and just seeing blankets of snow. It was so beautiful. It was like pure white blankets of snow. That's probably my earliest. Many other memories 1 to 7 though,
That's
but
wild. Yeah.
yeah, that was my earliest one. It's kind of funny because I'm not a snow person now. I'm like a chase the sun person. Maybe I was scared of it. Maybe I was like, this shit cold, bro. Like, get away from me.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Left
fascinating.
an impression. I mean, that's really cool.
That's really interesting. And I have always found snow quite beautiful, especially when there's like fresh powder and stuff. I went backpacking to Patagonia once through a blizzard, and I thought it was pretty heinous going through it, but it was also gorgeous going through it. It's so cool. And actually, when I was doing that in Patagonia, I do remember that I recalled that memory and I thought about that.
Wow.
Yeah. Wait, what was your earliest memory?
Um, I don't remember absolutely, but I just remember a set of events, around 4 years old. Things like, interacting with friends, or, just various situations that
Yeah.
I've,
Yeah.
I've kind of like revisited over time.
Okay. Okay. Got it. That's so interesting. I hadn't, nobody's ever asked me what was my earliest memory before, at least not that I could remember right now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. Your description is like really vivid. That was the same with my wife's memory. Like she remembered visiting Disney park, and like Princess Castle, and she
Oh, wow.
revisited as an adult, and she's like, "Wait, there's nothing like I remembered. It's like much. This window is like much smaller than I thought it was."
Damn, ruined it. Can't have regret. Leave it there. Leave it there.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny. Okay. I would love to actually get into Michael Levin next time because Gilder was talking about Michael Levin. Um, but we'll save that for next time because gotta run, take care of my health, and go to the gym. And I know you got a thing you gotta go to too. So we'll leave the viewers there. Let us know if you enjoyed the build in public update or the consciousness history and consciousness meets AI and quantum computing and all the speculation, and then also just dropping some knowledge that we have, and then just riffing back and forth about it to make sense more of it together. Let us know if you like this. We're always looking for feedback on how we can improve the pod. Thanks everybody for listening to ABCs for Building the Future. This has been your host, Jonathan and Robert, co-founders of Epistemic Me, where we're building towards AI alignment. If you're interested in joining our open source project, let us know in the comments, subscribe to the newsletter. All right, everybody, take care. Have a wonderful day.